So there was recently a World of Warcraft panel at PAX East where they talked about a bunch of history of the game, but also gave us some information and teases for future content coming to specifically retail World of Warcraft. If you saw my previous video, I went over some of this information that we finally got it confirmed that Legion Remix is the next remix event, and we're also going to be getting Mythic Plus with that and a new world tier system for the open world to make that much more difficult. But something else that has been covered a little bit less is a tease that they did after Legion Remix. And this was a tease into the next new game mode coming to World of Warcraft. Now, if we go back to last expansion, that's when these new experimental game modes essentially started. Some people will say that Season of Discovery is also kind of one of these experimental game modes, but I'm more specifically talking about game modes that are kind of more built around retail World of Warcraft or are just built around WoW in general and aren't specific, which brings us to our first experimental game mode in Plunderstorm, which if you never played this or even heard about this was essentially a battle royale within World of Warcraft. You actually queued up in a separate section within the game. You had completely different characters, and when you got in, it was a completely different combat system. It was action combat within WoW. It was actually really well made. The first time this was released, it was very popular. They even held some content creator tournaments, and I think this game mode was generally a pretty big success, even though a lot of people complained because it had permanent rewards for retail, and a lot of people didn't like it because it's PvP. But even with all of that considered, Plunderstorm was a pretty big success. They also brought it back another time for around a month as well, and it seemed a good amount of people were also playing it for the second time too. And after Plunderstorm, we got the second experimental event, which was the start of WoW Remix. I think WoW Remix was a lot more successful for the WoW player base than Plunderstorm was, but both of these kind of different gameplay modes seem to have been developed by the same team within the World of Warcraft team, the experimental gameplay team. And then going past Mists of Pandaria Remix, we now haven't confirmed that we're getting Legion Remix with a bunch of new things in that. So that'll be another experimental mode in the future. But then we got the small amount of teases for this next, seeming to be more experimental gameplay mode that we'll also be getting in the future. And they only gave us a couple pieces of small information. First off, they described this as a scary story mode. So it sounds like it's going to be something more horror based, or at least they're trying to make it a bit scary. They confirmed it's not another battle royale, and they gave us an image of Darkshire. Now, some people were saying that this may be something to do with Classic, but Darkshire has not been updated in retail WoW either, so you can't really tell the difference if this is something based around retail or based around Classic. I think it is a very low chance that they build this experimental gameplay mode within Classic World of Warcraft, and since they were kind of comparing it to Plunderstorm, I'm presuming this is not going to be something you need like a max level retail World of Warcraft player for. There will probably be another tab like Plunderstorm that you'll be able to go play this in. Which also means that anybody with a World of Warcraft sub, whether you're a Classic player or retail player, would easily be able to play this without having to go to either of the versions and like progress a character to then play this mode in. And there is a handful of theories around what this could be. I think one of the first ones is it being like a Vampire Survivors type mode. And one of the only reasons around this, I think, is because first off, they did say it was going to be a bit more scary. Vampire Survivors does have a bit more of that scary theme, but we also in the past, actually before we got Remix or Plunderstorm, had some data mined information specifically saying they were working on a Survivors type mode like this, which if you never played that, it's like a bullet hell type game. Vampire Survivors, I think, is the most popular one, but there is a ton of them now. You essentially just control the movement of your character, and as you defeat enemies that are constantly coming to you, you choose new abilities that are all auto cast, and as you choose more and more abilities, you can start upgrading these abilities, and depending on the specific game, you can start to evolve these powers, and your whole objective is just to survive and kill any of the bosses that also come in waves. And it's just a really addictive game genre, and if they could get it to work with this experimental gameplay team, this would definitely be a really cool mode for World of Warcraft. I think they could actually make it work really well. And one of the funnest parts about these type of games is just trying out all the powers and combinations. And we already have so many different abilities in World of Warcraft, whether it be from NPCs, bosses, or character abilities, that portion of this type of game mode would be incredibly fun. Now, another really interesting theory I saw is a Dead by Daylight mode. And if you've never heard of this game, it's a PvP game where there's 4 survivors and 1 killer. And the 4 survivors try to work together through a bunch of different means and mechanics and running from the killer to try to survive that game. And there is a bunch of different killers you can choose from. They even have like themed ones like Ghostface or Freddy Krueger. And the killers just run around in the match trying to find and then sacrifice or kill the survivors. And I think there's 2 big reasons why a lot of people were having this theory. First off, it being a more scary game mode, maybe even going more into horror, which Dead by Daylight kind of is. Then seemingly have it based in Darkshire. That type of game mode just fits really well with that zone. One of the darkest zones in WoW, even with the kind of lighting effects of all the torches that NPCs carry around. And then you also just have Stitches that always walks down the road, and you could have Stitches be like the main or one of the main killers for this Dead by Daylight mode, where maybe there's a handful of survivors that are just playing like undergeared characters or like townsfolk in Darkshire, and Stitches is coming to try to kill them or something like that. That could definitely be a game mode that, if they could get it to work and be fun, would actually fit pretty well with the theme of Darkshire and the entirety of the Duskwood zone. I also had the theory that it may be some type of murder mystery mode. The only issue with this is that they would definitely want this to be more gameplay centric, because I seriously doubt they would make some type of mode that is not completely focused around gameplay. And they could still probably do this with some type of murder mystery, but murder mystery almost sounds much less gameplay focused and more like investigating what's going on here. And that could be really cool, but again, I think whatever these experimental gameplay modes end up being, they are going to be much more gameplay focused. And if I would have my choice out of those 3 theories, I would definitely want the Vampire Survivors type mode. I think a mode like that could work just so well for World of Warcraft, especially with the game just being 20 years old, having all of these characters, having all these NPCs, all these bosses with all these different abilities. They could easily just give us so many different characters to try out in a mode like this, with so many different abilities to try out, that it would be an incredibly fun and addicting mode, as a lot of the survival games are themselves. And I do really like that they are continuing to make and try out these experimental gameplay modes. I think Plunderstorm will probably be brought back a bunch of other times. I think they'll probably end up making it in a different zone with different abilities, even though that's much less popular than Remix. But then we also have Remix that was incredibly successful, incredibly popular, that we already know is coming back now, and is a really good way for them to test other systems in a more enclosed environment, like they're doing with the Shattered Timeline system in Legion Remix. And it's just a really good way for them to reuse whole expansions. And I think Legion Remix is probably going to be one of the things replacing Season 4 in the War Within. Instead of getting like the Faded season, we'll be getting Legion Remix and probably some other stuff. But then I really like them continuing to try to experiment with different modes in World of Warcraft. Not only is that just really good for them and really good for the player base in general, because it keeps more people subbed, they're constantly giving new things to try, new experiments still within World of Warcraft, especially with these experimental gameplay modes being easily playable by both classic and retail players. I think that's just really good for the player base and keeping subs for the game in general. But that's pretty much all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.